But now let's bring some order back to this show. It's Megyn Kelly time, one of the biggest stars of US broadcasting, host of the must-listen podcast, The Megyn Kelly Show, joins us with her unique take on American news and culture. Coming up, have Washington's decisions about the fate of Kabul damaged trust in London? A former Prime Minister certainly doesn't hold back on that one. But first, the blame game is raging in the US over who is responsible for the terrifying mess in Afghanistan. So Megyn tweeted, does anyone really think Trump would be sitting there doing nothing as the Taliban took city after city and then humiliated the US? But Trump did not negotiate with the Taliban. He got a lot of criticism for that at the time. Megyn, I guess the point is that Donald Trump probably, I agree with you, would have changed course, whereas Biden just wasn't listening to the generals, he wasn't listening to the facts on the ground, and I think his presidency is looking damn shaky.
Look, I think it's fair to say that both Trump and Biden wanted our troops out of Afghanistan. You know, Trump is the one that struck the deal with the Taliban. Joe Biden 100% could have reversed that, as he's reversed many policies Trump put into place when it comes to our southern border, when it comes to the Paris Accords, when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal. I could go on. He chose not to. Why? Because he also wanted every last man and woman out of Afghanistan. And no one's really being totally honest about that fact. I mean, Biden is sort of saying, yes, I wanted it, but he's kind of feigning surprise that the Taliban would take over so quickly. I never saw that coming. Well, bull. He did. He knew that the Taliban would take over, if not within 11 days, then certainly within probably 6 months. He knew. He didn't care. He wanted the troops out. He was solving a problem that in large measure, Dan, didn't exist. There were no protests in the streets here in America about getting those last troops out. We had between 2,500 and 3,500 troops there, way down from where it was mid-Trump's presidency, 15,000 or so. The American people weren't out there marching, saying, bring them home. First, it was Trump who was trying to fulfill a campaign promise, saying, I'll bring them home. And then it was Biden who has an ideological bias against this, against having troops abroad and against this war, and wanted them out of there. And not much of a thought was given to what position is that going to leave Americans in, the international community in. And so I think both wanted the troops out. What I don't believe, however, is that Trump would have handled the withdrawal anywhere near as poorly as Biden has. And I just don't think there's any chance, as he watched the Taliban marching city after city after city, not living up to the deal he struck with them, on their way to taking control without any sort of a grace period to let us out, would have sat back and done nothing.
Completely right, because Trump is about winning. Of course, this situation, Megyn, has severely damaged trust between the British government and the US government. Theresa May, our former Prime Minister, particularly critical. I want to play you what she had to say yesterday.
What President Biden has done is upheld a decision that was made by President Trump. It was a unilateral decision of President Trump to do a deal with the Taliban that has led to this withdrawal.
She also questioned whether British intelligence was genuinely so poor and if the UK had just followed the lead of the US. Have a listen to this.
Was our intelligence really so poor? Was our understanding of the Afghan government so weak? Was our knowledge of the position on the ground so inadequate? Or did we really believe this? Or did we just feel that we had to follow the United States and hope that on a wing and a prayer it would be all right on the night?
Very significant, Megyn, for a former Prime Minister to be questioning what is always viewed as such a special alliance between the UK and the US. But can you understand why our politicians are?
100%. This is like two families that are neighbors where the kids love each other, but the parents can't get along. The parents over the course of time realize that they're not trustworthy people and they need to start being skeptical of one another. And look, let's face it, Trump made a decision when it comes to withdrawing troops from this war that was very controversial in some circles. I mean, there were some more, they call them neocons over here, who really didn't like Trump's decision. And now I think you're seeing a broader coalition questioning that decision. And then Biden carried it out in the most irresponsible way possible. And I think Theresa May is wondering why no one coordinated with Great Britain, why the British military commanders who have been over there helping weren't involved in any of the discussions or the planning or even apprised of the timing of the withdrawal. What kind of a thanks is that by Biden to the Brits and at the end of the day are left wondering how their citizens are getting out, how the people who helped all of our troops, the Afghans who helped us, are getting out, and not being involved in the coordination, to the point where Boris Johnson can't even get his phone call returned from the sitting U.S. president who's on vacation. For 36 hours, we blew off Boris Johnson because Joe Biden, who spoke to no world leaders for a day and a half, couldn't be bothered to return his phone call. I'd be mad too.
It's astonishing. And then, Megyn, the other big question is about what Biden knew, what he was being advised as compared to what he said in public. So I want to play you this press conference. It was from just about 6 weeks ago, just to remind you what Biden told the U.S. public. Have a listen.
Is the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped, as well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force, against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
And do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling...
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan.
I mean, Megyn, not only was he catastrophically wrong, I think he lied to the American public, because actually his military advisors had reached the conclusion that the Taliban would take over very quickly.
Yeah, and you're seeing in our papers here that blame game play out, where the military commanders are leaking to the press that they did indeed advise him of that, and that he overruled them, saying, it's time, I'm pulling the troops out. Now the White House gets planted in the papers saying, well, those assessments weren't of a high degree of confidence, and therefore Joe Biden couldn't really trust them. Here's what else I read in the papers here, leaked by the White House. Their defense, Dan, is, well, we didn't think it was going to happen this fast. They knew the Taliban was going to take over. They knew that the Afghan army, 300,000 strong, versus the Taliban, 75,000, could not withstand the fight without the American air support and the American intelligence that we'd been providing to make that army functional and operational. They had been trying, but without us, they couldn't do it. And the truth is that their hearts and minds weren't in it anyway. Their president, who left with three cars full of cash, tens of millions of dollars given to him by the American taxpayers, tucked tail and ran. This is who they were supposedly fighting for. The money wasn't getting to the officers at the front, so it was largely an unpaid army. They couldn't get a lot of food and water up to the front. So what were they fighting for? This corrupt government that really had no loyalty to them whatsoever? Whereas on the other hand, you got a bunch of jihadists who have an ideological or religious mission that they're fighting for. And so we knew, Joe Biden knew the Taliban was going to take over. It's just a question of when. So whether it was within 11 days or 6 months, don't believe that he's shocked the Taliban's now running Afghanistan. And that is going to have real consequences to Great Britain, to America, and to any free democracy across this land, because they hate us for what we stand for how we live. And that's going to come back to bite us, I hope, later rather than sooner. But the experts say it's the reverse.
Indeed. And just finally on this Afghanistan matter, Megyn, I spoke about earlier in the show, and we played the clip. I think Biden shamed himself in the interview with George Stephanopoulos when Stephanopoulos raised those horrific images of Afghanis literally falling from the sky as they clung to the foreign planes evacuating from Kabul. And rather than show any humanity or any thought for those people and what they were going through in that moment, Biden flicked his hand in the air and said, that was 4 days ago. I just thought, I've never seen a response from a sitting US president that had less humanity than that moment.
He didn't care. He was thinking about himself, because that image is an indelible stain on his presidency, and he knows it. And by the way, it wasn't 4 or 5 days earlier when the question was asked. It was 2 days earlier. So once again, Biden can't keep track of time or count days, or isn't intentionally just trying to make it sound longer in time, so it's not quite as jarring. But it is jarring. It's the bookend to the other image that helped kick off this war in Afghanistan. People jumping from the World Trade Center so as not to be burned to death. They jumped from the World Trade Center and fell through the air to try to avoid the bombs essentially flown into those buildings by Al-Qaeda with an assist from the Taliban. And those young men fell from that plane, fell through the air, trying to escape that same group, the Taliban, who would certainly have killed them when they found out that they were helping the Americans. And Biden's response is basically a shoulder shrug and to get angry that the question has even been asked of him. This is the same guy whose empathy, whose competence we're told we must respect, even if you don't like his policies. And as they're falling apart, he's saying to us, well, I'm all about human rights. Our foreign policy now is going to be human rights based. And you're already hearing reports of young girls in Afghanistan being raped by the Taliban. Then they're forced to marry their rapists under a principle within the Taliban's edicts. Then you've got women who are the doors are forced open. They're forced to feed dozens of Taliban. When they come back for the third night in a row and the woman no longer has food, she's beaten to death. Okay, so our human rights new policy is going to take care of women like that and girls like that through, quote, diplomacy, because he's just, I guess, going to appeal to the Taliban's better nature to stop doing that. We're supposed to believe it, Dan, because the Taliban had some media training and has put a couple of guys out in front of a couple of microphones to tell us to ignore the child rape, the child torture they've been doing for years, the abuse of women, and so on, because it's a new, more reasonable group. Sure.
And Megyn, look, I had to talk to you about this Naomi Osaka moment, because obviously we've been following her story closely, haven't we? This is an exchange that she had with a journalist from Cincinnati called Paul Doherty. We'll watch it, see what happens, and then get you to react off the back.
You're not crazy about dealing with us, especially in this format. Yet you have a lot of outside interests that are served by having a media platform. I guess my question is, how do you balance the two? And also, do you have anything you'd like to share with us about what you did say to Simone Biles?
When you say I'm not crazy about dealing with you guys, what does that refer to?
Well, you've stated you don't especially like the press conference format.
Mm.
And yet that seems to be the obviously the most widely used means of communicating to the media and through the media to the public.
That's interesting. I would say the occasion, like when to do the press conference, is what I feel is the most difficult. But
I think we can move on to the next question. Naomi, do you want to move on to the next question?
No, I'm actually very interested in that, point of view. So if you could repeat that, that'd be awesome.
The question was that you're not especially fond of dealing with the media, especially.
Hopefully it's okay if I ask a couple of tennis questions. The first one is just how the training has been and how your preparation has been for the summer.
Oh, Megyn. I thought that was a perfectly reasonable question. It was very politely asked. What was going down?
It was. And look, she was having an emotional moment, okay? It happens. Maybe she was thinking about everything that's happened over the past month. I have no idea. What bothered me about this whole exchange was the statement that was released by her agent. And make no mistake about it, Dan, her agent speaks for her. Her agent's anger reflected hers very clearly. And the agent, who represents a woman who makes $55 million a year, right? She's the #1 highest paid female sports star, not just tennis, sports star in the world, goes after this guy at the Cincinnati Enquirer who probably makes $60,000 a year if he's lucky. It's a local struggling paper. This guy gets tarred as a bully, by her bully agent for asking that question, which was sensitively worded. We were told, oh, but the tone was aggressive. It was and anyone on the Zoom, says the agent, would have understood that it was an aggressive tone. No, it wasn't. It wasn't even a little aggressive. Do they understand what aggressive tones are? Did they watch a presidential debate? Did they watch GBNews? Do they understand how reporting and journalism actually supposed to work?
It was a nice question. It was a softball.
100%. And here's what's annoying about it. His paper comes out and defends the question, saying, okay, we defend his question. But then I wrote it here. Then they said, we sincerely regret, however, if his question upset her in any way. Why? You don't need to say that as a paper. That's for her mommy to say. That is for her agent to say. That's for her friends to say. A journalistic entity doesn't have to apologize for a perfectly reasonable question, even if it wound up eliciting an upset response, right? So here's what's happening there, Dan. The agent is taking advantage of this weird power dynamic that's going on right now in our world. She is a young person of color who's played the mental health card. He's a white guy who's part of the media establishment. Therefore, she has no power. She has no power in the media's eyes, and he has all of it. Why? Because it just boils down to gender and skin color and no relevant real power, right? The fact that she can get on any magazine cover in the world. She can carry the torch at the Olympic opening ceremony. As far as I know, Paul Doherty wasn't invited to do any of those things. He doesn't have a platform like she has, so he's got to be punished and publicly embarrassed because he had the nerve to ask her gently about a controversy she's been in the middle of, and we're supposed to look at her with all of that as the victim.
Indeed, and you know what? He wouldn't have been doing his job if he didn't ask that question, in my opinion, because it's all anyone has been talking about in regards to Naomi Osaka. So I actually give credit to Paul for asking that question because he knew how she was probably not going to react well to it, and he knew that he was going to get a pile on. So I say good on him for doing so.
Well, and she gave a thoughtful answer, and he wrote that up too. So it wound up being a substantive exchange, and that's called journalism, Mr. Agent. And by the way, the Cincinnati Enquirer too. It's called journalism.
Whisper it, Megyn. We love your journalism. Thank you so much for being here this week, and we'll speak again very soon.